Hi besties and welcome back to my trash channel. I don't know if you realized but I took a break but I'm back now. This is a Halloween special, and if you're watching the premiere I love you. Anyways, I won't keep you waiting. Enjoy the video. Distraught face. Upward turned hand gesturing with fingers pinched together. I dare you. Who the fuck do you think I am, 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀? In no way am I doing that. Come on, you know you want to, and this is the perfect chance. I definitely do not want to do that. You're out of your mind. A dare is a dare. You have to do it. I don't remember being asked if I wanted to do it at all, so there was no deal to begin with. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 and Sakuatsu squabbled as they walked themselves to their destination. Sakuatsu's cheeks dusted pink regarding 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀's disgusting remark, but 𝗴𝘴𝘬𝘬 wouldn't back down, continuing to push his dare onto him. You're lucky I'm even going. I'm not doing your dumbass dare as well. You'll want to. I know it. Like hell I will. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 eventually stopped walking, ultimately making Sakuatsu also stop. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 looked up and turned to give Sakuatsu a thumbs up with an excited smile on his face. Why are we even here? He said, looking up at the familiar building in front of him. He stood next to 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 who had a wide smile on his face, whereas he himself wore a frown. What do you mean? You know why we're here. I know. But why are we here? Both Sakuatsu and 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 had been invited to a costume party hosted by 𝗴𝘢𝘬 at 𝗴𝘢𝘬's house. Sakuatsu had somehow been pushed to be involved in their massive friend group, and now here he was, being invited to parties that he had no interest in going to. It was also hosted by 𝗴𝘢𝘬 of all people, so he had even lower of expectations. Even though it was a costume party, Sakuatsu had decided not to wear one. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 had to convince him to come to the party in the first place, and convincing him to wear a costume on top of that just wasn't going to happen. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 was wearing a black hooded cloak, a costume idea that he came up with last minute and in Sakuatsu's opinion looked like shit, and 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 agreed, it wasn't the best. Can we go home? Please. We're already here, and home is like 4 hours away. I meant the hotel. Let's go anywhere but here. Well, you're too late. We're going in and that's final. We're already late. It started at 7. Well, if we're so late we might as well not show up. He was cut off by the sound of 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 walking to the door and giving it 3 loud knocks. His frown fell deeper, debating if he should just run off before someone answered the door. But 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 turned around back to him to give him a death glare that said stay. He sighed but decided to comply because maybe he did have a reason to stay. It didn't take long for someone to answer the door. Loud and heavy footsteps could be heard even before the door was answered, though it eventually swung open, revealing 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘀𝘀 who was dressed as a vampire. Heavy black boots were worn at his feet which were probably causing all of the noise. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘀𝘀𝑐𝑀-san, 𝗚𝗵𝑚ie-san, welcome. At first he had a smile on his face, his hands at his hips while standing proudly, probably to show off his outfit. Though eventually he moved his gaze down to his guests below him at the doorstep and his smile almost immediately hindered and he let out a small gasp, examining the clothing they were wearing. What is it with these guests? You do know this is a costume party, right? Why has almost everyone come in normal clothes? He frowned and 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀 smiled nervously, rubbing the back of his head while Sakuatsu remained emotionless behind him. Sakuatsu was just wearing what he'd usually wear, a collared, white shirt beneath a grey sweatshirt, and he wore baggy jeans on his lower half. It seemed he put at least a little bit of effort into his outfit, but he honestly didn't think about it all too much. It wasn't like he cared what any of the people that happened to be there thought of him. What is that you're wearing, 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘀𝘀𝑐𝑀-san? You look like you're wearing a trash bag. Sakuatsu would be lying if he didn't find the comment at least a little bit funny. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀𝑀 letting out an offended gasp, but he knew full well that the comment was probably true. I'll have you know, I thought long and hard about my costume. Yeah. It shows. 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀𝑐𝑀 scoffed again, this time crossing his arms as he spoke. Just be glad I showed up in one in the first place, unlike this nitwit. The comment was directed at Sakuatsu, as shown by 𝗴𝘬𝘬𝘶𝑀 pointed finger, but the spiker's face remained emotionless. Yeah. What did you come as, 𝗚𝗵𝑚ie-san? Myself. It's a scary costume to be honest. Sakuatsu scoffed. His cousin was calling him scary and he wasn't sure if he was meant to take it as a compliment or an insult. 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘀𝘀 laughed, taking a step back to usher them into his house. Come in. Picklqous took a couple more steps back and a few to the side, allowing for the two of them to enter, Sakuatsu following behind Komori like he was his shadow. Picklqous then closed the door and began walking with the pair to his living room. From the outside, as Sakuatsu took note of, Picklqous' house looked a decent size, though from the inside it was even bigger. He could tell Picklqous was well off, and the large amount of decorations for such a small party further added to his case. Eventually they reached the living room where all the guests were. It seemed that they were the last of them to arrive, but that wasn't too much of a surprise judging by the fact they did arrive almost 40 minutes late since Sakuatsu was trying to fight his way into not going, but that clearly didn't work out. Hey. Sakuatsu scanned the room. It was way too full for his liking. Some people laid lazily on the couch and the rest of them sat on the floor either talking or playing on their phones. Sakuatsu took note of the people he had seen, from the all too familiar faces of Atsumu and Osamu to the slightly less familiar ones and the ones he had only seen once before and talked briefly over their group chat together. It seemed Picklqous wasn't lying about the lack of effort put into everyone's outfits. Only a handful of them were actually wearing a costume. Here. Is everyone here now? 𝗚𝗵icious voice seemed louder over the rest of the voices in the room. It seemed the question was directed at Picklqous, who gave him a nod back as he spoke. That's everyone. Alright, good. Everyone shut your dirty asses up. The room quietened slightly, but it wasn't until 𝗚𝗵icious shouted a second time that they all actually shut up. Whether it was Hinata trying to convince Kojima that his pumpkin costume was actually amazing or the twins who were shouting at each other for seemingly no reason. It was in that moment Atsumu locked eyes with Sakuatsu, finally registering his presence in the room and giving him a small, soft smile and a wave. Sakuatsu did the same back, though it didn't last for long. Osamu hitting the back of Atsumu's head and half whispering something into his twin's ear that Sakuatsu couldn't hear. Alright, what do you guys wanna do? He stood up, tapping the side of his red plastic cup that was filled with some sort of punch with a spoon like he wanted to make a toast at a wedding, but he ended up just making himself look like a complete idiot. You're the one who's telling us to shut up, you decide. 𝗚𝗵icious huffed, pressing a hand to his hip and lowering the hand holding the cup, death glaring at Iwaizumi, before he spoke again. Any suggestions of what we should do? We should play truth or dare. A little cliche, don't you think? Cliche, yes, but who doesn't love a good game of truth or dare? I don't. Yeah. Me neither. I'd rather not. Shut up. We're playing truth or dare. Tanaka's tone was a little spiteful, but he of course didn't mean it like that. He could just feel a series of I don't like truth or dares erupting, so he decided to stop them so that no one more could state their wrong opinions. So truth or dare it is. Absolutely not. Alright, everyone get into a circle so we can play. Yay. Tsukishima scoffed as 𝗚𝗵icious completely cut him off, crossing his legs in his seat. To Sakuatsu's surprise, they all seemed to listen quite well, forming a wonky circle around where 𝗚𝗵icious was stood before he took a seat in the circle himself. Sakuatsu was then ushered by Komori into it, where he sat between his cousin and no one. It wasn't really a surprise to him. Out of everyone there, he was probably the person they all knew the least. Well, almost everyone. Sakuatsu turned his head to his left, catching a certain blonde sit down next to him, his twin brother next to Atsumu. The setter turned to Sakuatsu to give him a smile. Sakuatsu the same back as his cheeks slightly tinted pink. The blonde didn't look away, looking at him as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out of his mouth. He looked almost nervous, though Sakuatsu decided not to push it. Sakuatsu had gotten to know Atsumu quite well. It was more like he was forced into getting to know him, but in the end he had gotten to know him. Atsumu must have taken an interest in being his friend when they first met properly at the All Japan's training camp, and he hadn't left him alone since. The boy was loud and wouldn't let him have peace for one moment. Even when they left the camp, Atsumu would practically spam him every day until he replied, and somehow, it always worked. They had even called and FaceTimed a couple of times. So seeing him now almost made him unexpectedly sad. He secretly wanted that loud and obnoxious Atsumu to come out and for him to annoy him until his eardrums felt like they were about to burst. But for some reason, Atsumu seemed to be unfortunately quiet, timid and nervous. He tried his best to brush the thought off. 𝗚𝗵icious starting to speak again. But despite his nature he really wanted to ask if he was okay. Alright, who wants to go first? Sakuatsu sighed. Why were they even playing this game? They are teenagers, ages 15 to 17 at best. Why were they playing some dumb game that 8-year-olds would play? But this wasn't going to be the only childish game they would play tonight, and Sakuatsu knew it. It was going to be a long night. They ended up playing Truth or Dare for about an hour, and Sakuatsu tried his best to zone out the whole thing, but he ended up hearing some things from when it was his turn. He spent most of the time staring at the floor and taking sips from his cup, but he couldn't help but glance at the older boy next to him, who half the time was already looking back at him. They'd both look back down at the floor simultaneously, blood rising to Sakuatsu's cheeks. The blonde clearly wanted to say something. He just couldn't find a way to say it, so he ended up just staring at Sakuatsu until the spiker looked back at him and they'd both get awkward. Sakuatsu tried his best to ignore what was happening with 𝗚𝗵cie, but he couldn't stop himself from feeling curious, something he rarely felt anymore. But soon the game ended, everyone taking a small break to talk to one another and refill their cups. But eventually 𝗚𝗫𝘀 spoke up again, announcing once again that he wanted to play another game, but Sakuatsu had already left. Nobody but his cousin seemed to notice, and why would they? They barely even knew him. He took himself and his cup that he had refilled into 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀's backyard. He let out a loud sigh as soon as his back hit the back of one of 𝗴𝘢𝘬𝘶𝘀𝘀's outdoor chairs as he began to mindlessly play on his phone. He wasn't sure if he could handle another moment in that group. He thought he might go insane. It was much too loud and cramped. Plus it was an unfamiliar environment with unfamiliar people. It was cold out, but he'd rather stay outside than spend his time in an intoxicating room full to the brim of strangers. Why did Komori even force him to come? He knows he hates socializing, so this was like a nightmare come true. Komori-san? 𝗚𝗚𝘚 leaned to his left, whispering to Komori who was now next to him. The boy looked back at him with a smile. They were in the middle of a spin the bottle game, a game that almost everyone there had no interest in playing, and that included 𝗚𝗚𝘚. Do ya know where Omi went? Sakuatsu. Blood rose to 𝗚𝗚𝘚's cheeks, dusting his cheeks a light pink. I'm not sure actually. I knew he'd run off eventually. Parties, even ones this small, aren't really his thing. So you have no clue of where he is? Well, he's not here, and he probably won't be snooping around 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝘀's house, so I'd say he's probably outside or playing on his phone in the bathroom. That's my guess. Outside. Yes. Why? A smile grew on 𝗚𝗚𝘚's face as he stood up, dusting his clothes off and sorting out the wrinkles formed in his clothing. Thank you, Komori-san. 𝗚𝗚𝘚 then began to walk to the door. Komori was a little confused for a moment, but eventually his mouth widened, forming a smirk as he turned to Akagi sat next to him. 𝗚𝗚𝘚, where do you think you're going? But 𝗚𝗚𝘚 was already out the room, making sure to shut the door behind himself, letting whoever was watching him leave know that he didn't want to be followed. He let his hand rest on top of the door handle for a moment, taking a deep breath in, eventually smiling to himself as he released his grip, walking fast to wherever he thought outside was. He walked around the building a little. It was almost too large for its own good, until he looked through a large window, his cheeks painting a soft pink as the silhouette of Sakuatsu appeared in it. It was dark out, the only light coming from Kiyumi's phone, and even from the inside of the house it looked cold out, the shaking of the trees outdoor confirming his belief that it was windy. But the weather was practically perfect for what day it was. It's Halloween after all. He hummed to himself, taking a deep breath in and slowly releasing as he neared the exit to the backyard. He placed his hand on the door handle, taking in yet another breath before opening it, Sakuatsu's vision quickly snapping to him at the noise. He looked him up and down trying to figure out who it was before giving an unexpected smile that only made 𝗚𝗚𝘚's cheeks redden even more, though luckily it was hidden by the darkness. Here Omi. Hey, what are you doing here? I came to find you, of course. What? Sakuatsu shuffled in his seat, angling his body towards 𝗚𝗚𝘚 more. 𝗚𝗚𝘚 started playing with his hands. That yet again was disguised by the dark night, and despite his confident tone, he still felt nervous. What you actin' all surprised for? I just came to see ya. Shouldn't you be enjoying yourself at this party? They play and spin the bottle. It's not exactly my thing, you know. Sakusa hummed, turning away from the blonde to look at the moon. Atsumu taking the opportunity to walk to the seat positioned next to Sakusa's chair and sat down himself. Sakusa looking back as he heard the noise. Why bother me then? Go hang out with your friends. Yeah, my friend. Sakusa turned away from Atsumu once again, his eyes trying to focus on anything that was in the sky, blood rising to his cheeks at Atsumu's comment. He guessed knowing that he had someone other than Komori made him happy. Plus I don't really wanna watch everyone make out with whoever. I'd most definitely prefer to hang out with you all night. Plus what type of party is one that you spend alone? A good one. Atsumu scoffed but couldn't stop the smile forming on his face. He admired the way Sakusa's hair and clothing swayed in the wind and the way he looked up at the sky with what he suspected was a smile on his face. It was windier than he thought it would be when he judged the weather from inside the house, but it was surprisingly relaxing despite the bitter cold. Aren't you cold? We should go back inside. And what? Watch them all eat each other's faces? Yeah, no chance. I didn't mean to join the group again. We can just do our own thing, you know. Or you can just join your friends again, and leave me alone. Atsumu let out an offended gasp, pressing a hand to his chest that Sakusa couldn't even see since he was facing the opposite way, but it added to the effect. I'm in the same boat as you know. I don't wanna see them suck each other's faces off, but I also don't wanna be alone. It is a party, you know. You're not meant to be alone. Well, I'd prefer to be alone, so you go find someone else to hang out with. Too bad. You can't get away from me that easily. Sakusa scoffed, finally turning back around to meet Atsumu's gaze, his honey, gold eyes practically glowing in the dark night, almost like the moon which he could stare at for hours on end. I'm sure there's at least one other person there that doesn't want to watch people make out. I'm sure they'll be glad to accept your company. Well, they're too late then. They already decided I'm staying with you. Whoa. Lucky me. Lucky you indeed. The awesome Atsumu Miya has chosen to spend the next few hours with you. You should be honored. So honored. Sakusa sighed, his gaze eventually meeting the floor which he stared at, his mind running at 100 miles per hour, though he could still feel Atsumu's glowing moons still staring at his skin. It could almost seem creepy, but Sakusa decided to not say anything. He eventually turned his head back to meet Atsumu's eyes, the blonde's face wearing a smile, and all he wanted to do was return it, but he wouldn't let himself. You know, I'm not exactly an interesting person. You'll get bored. Huh? Not interesting? Omi, have you met yourself? What? Yeah, like mysterious. Mysterious and interesting aren't the same thing. They have similar qualities. Either way, I think you're interesting. I don't see why, but you think what you want, I guess. You don't speak much, but you're a good listener and you say some interesting things when you want to. Come to think of it, you're a good listener, even when you make it seem like you're not listening to a word I'm saying. You always say something related. You're not so slick, you know. You don't know that. I do. You listen to every word I say. We're practically perfect for each other. Atsumu placed a hand over his mouth as soon as the words escaped it, his cheeks going pink. The same could be said for Sakusa, who had turned his head away from the blonde a little to hide the redding pigment of his cheeks, though his mask was already doing a decent job at hiding it. I didn't mean it like that. Just shut up. And Atsumu complied, ducking his head in embarrassment as Sakusa turned back away to look at the moon once again, though somehow his eyes were already missing those of Atsumu's. His own were wide and he tried his best to stop the smile forming on his face, the words "we're perfect for each other" repeating themselves over and over again in his mind. He tried his best to keep his composure. At least he tried to compose that of him that Atsumu could actually see. Atsumu was freaking out, his hand remaining clasped to his face, his eyes intensely staring at the back of Sakusa's head for any hint that he may turn back around, though luckily for him, he didn't seem like he was going to anytime soon. Eventually, after a few minutes of silence, they regained their composure, the pair relaxing and beginning to enjoy the quiet, the only sound coming from Sakusa shuffling in his chair and the shaking of the leaves on the trees, some seemingly colorless ones falling down from their branches and scattering on the grass. Atsumu wanted to speak up and say something, but he decided not to, waiting a couple more minutes before speaking up. wanting to enjoy the quiet and the simple presence of Sakusa's relaxed state. Maybe 𝗴𝘚𝘂 was starting to see what Sakusa enjoyed about the quiet. "You're gonna sit out here forever?" 𝗴𝘚𝘂 heard a humming sound come from Sakusa as the spiker finally turned his head around to meet his own gaze. His eyes looked completely relaxed, much different than what they looked like when he first saw him earlier that day. They had looked a little anxious and on edge. The blonde's heart began to flutter, all sorts of thoughts like "he's relaxed around me" beginning to fill his mind. "If I have to. It's getting cold. Don't you think we should go back inside?" "And do what?" 𝗴𝘚𝘂 thought for a moment, placing a finger to his chin like he was in some children's kids show, and that only made Sakusa smile softly. Though eventually, 𝗴𝘚𝘂 seemingly thought of something. Oh. This is a costume party after all. What? SHHH. Don't worry about it. Just come with me. What? No. Where are we going? Don't think about it too much. We're just gonna find a room. What? No. I'm not snooping around 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's house with you. I didn't mean it like that. It might seem like we're snooping with how big 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's house is. We just need to find a bedroom. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 stood up, brushing his clothes down while wearing a smile on his face as he looked towards Sakusa, gesturing for him to do the same and stand up. Sakusa scoffed but did as he wanted, picking his phone up from the table he had placed it on earlier. "I swear to God, if you end up getting us caught snooping around, I will end you," 𝗴𝘢 already said. "We're not snooping. The way you're saying it makes it seem like we are. Why can't you just tell me what we're doing anyways? It's a part of the surprise, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. You can't know." Sakusa scoffed, taking a step forward. "Fine. It better not be something dumb though. Oh, trust me, it's plenty dumb. But fun. So there's a positive to it. I swear." 𝗴𝘚𝘂 began to skip off to the door and Sakusa watched as he held the door open for him, gesturing for him to come through it, which he complied to with a sigh. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 saying ladies first as Sakusa walked through the door, only receiving a scowl and glare from Sakusa that the blonde simply laughed off. It soon became clear to Sakusa that 𝗴𝘚𝘂 had no clue to where he was going, but it wasn't like he had any more of an idea. 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's house was just massive. They paced along corridors for a while, 𝗴𝘚𝘂 stopping to check every room and groaning every time it wasn't what he was looking for. Though eventually they went upstairs onto the second floor, and almost immediately 𝗴𝘚𝘂 found the room he was looking for, letting out a victorious yes as soon as he walked in. Sakusa didn't see what was so special about the room. It was just a bedroom. They had walked into one on the bottom floor and this one looked practically the same, though maybe a little more decorated than the other. But only one look at the walls told Sakusa that it was 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's, his eyes instantly widening. The hell? Why are we in 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's room? To piss him off, of course. The walls were painted with posters of volleyball players, a few pictures of he and his friends scattered on the wall and various pictures of Akashi dotted along it. What? I've already told you. I'm not snooping around with you. Yes, you have, like a million times. Chill, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. We're not snooping. Sure seems like it. Just because it seems that way doesn't mean it is. He turned his head back to Sakusa, giving him a soft but mischievous smile, making Sakusa's cheeks regain heat, before walking to 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's bed and resting his hands on the volleyball bed covers. It was clear to see that the boy was obsessed with the sport, but so were they. "What are you doing? Do you have any scissors?" Sakusa raised an eyebrow and scoffed, walking closer to the boy who was still eyeing 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's duvet until he was standing just behind him. This gave the setter a slight shock as he turned to look behind himself, letting out a gasp as his cheeks dusted themselves a light pink, his arms leaning back onto the bed. "Oh yeah, because I always have scissors on hand." "Shut up, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. Just help me find some scissors." "Why do you need scissors anyways?" 𝗴𝘚𝘂 smiled, finally regaining his balance and standing up in front of Sakusa. They were surprisingly close to one another, and neither backed away. Maybe they liked the closed distance between each other. "We're gonna have matching Halloween costumes, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. What? You heard me. Now help me find some scissors." The blonde reluctantly marched off to 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝑜's desk where he began to search through his drawers while Sakusa stood in place, still trying to understand what the blonde needed scissors for. What kind of widow is going to have scissors in their room? Wouldn't you just get a pair from the kitchen, or whatever? Have you never heard of projects, 𝗚𝗵𝘇? Yeah, telling me you don't have scissors in your room? No. I don't. Yeah, the only weird one. Who wants to bother going to the kitchen for a pair of scissors? Especially if you live in a maze like 𝗴𝘢𝘀𝘀 does. I don't think his house would seem like a maze to him. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 ignored him for a second, moving to the second drawer down after finishing rooting through the top one and finding no scissors. Just shut up. Make yourself useful and help me find some scissors. Sakuatsu scoffed, standing still for a moment before sighing and doing as he requested, kneeling down to his knees so that he could reach the bottom drawer at the opposite side of 𝗴𝘀𝘀's desk where he would work himself up to the top one. They spent a good few minutes searching, 𝗴𝘚𝘂 sighing when each time he had gone through each drawer and not found what they were looking for. Though eventually, they found it, in the most obvious place that they were too blind to see. On 𝗴𝘀𝘀's desk, Sakuatsu scoffed as soon as he saw it, but 𝗴𝘚𝘂 smiled like he had just won something, even though it was his own stupidity that stopped him from seeing the scissors in the first place. They were seated by 𝗴𝘀𝘀's open pencil case that had pencils flowing out of it as it was on its side, pens touching the blade of it as it laid on top of an unused piece of paper. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 quickly picked the scissors up, showing them off to Sakuatsu like he was advertising them in a displeasing way that made him look like he was about to stab him with them. Finally, maybe if you weren't blind, you would have seen them sooner. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 scoffed, dropping his raised hand down to his side where he held the blades of the scissors between the palms of his hand. You didn't see them either. Don't act like I'm the only one. What did you even need them for anyways? Oh right. Thank you for reminding me. He smiled a gorgeous smile at Sakuatsu before turning away and back to 𝗴𝘀𝘀's bed. Sakuatsu's cheeks heating up at the simple look and his eyes nervously looking to the floor, then back to the setter when he had turned around, admiring the disgusting yet beautiful yellowness of his hair, his mouth curling up as he stopped to look at the outfit he was wearing. Rolled up baggy jeans with a white t-shirt on his top half and a yellow button-up jacket over the top of it. 𝗚𝗵𝘇. Ha. Sakuatsu was snapped out of his daze, his eyes meeting the perfect golden yellow ones of 𝗴𝘚𝘂 that almost matched the color of his open jacket. Do ya think we should use 𝗴𝘀𝘀's bed sheets to piss him off or find some clean ones? What do you even need bed sheets for? And clean ones, of course. God knows what has been on 𝗴𝘀𝘀's. We're marking costumes, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. What? We're gonna be ghosts, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 sounded almost too pleased with himself, removing his hand that was resting on 𝗴𝘀𝘀's bed and pressing it to his hip. Oh hell number. Yes. I saw people dress up as them on Insta, and they look too cute to not try. What's so amazing about an effortless costume? 𝗴𝘚𝘂 chuckled and Sakuatsu's cheeks heated up for the 100th time that night. It didn't take a genius to see that he was completely whipped for the blonde, though unfortunately, 𝗴𝘚𝘂 was a complete idiot. The real question is, what isn't so amazing about it? Come on, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. They looked so cute. How will you even be able to see with a sheet over the top of your head? I didn't need scissors for nothing, you know. They have a purpose. Oh right. Another positive is that no one will know who you are. Sakuatsu laughed and 𝗴𝘚𝘂's heart fluttered at the sound. Maybe he was just as whipped as Sakuatsu was for him. Then again, Sakuatsu could also be classed as a complete idiot. An idiot in love. Maybe that's what they were. Just two idiots blinded by their hearts. Yeah, like no one's going to suspect that the two people who ran off are the two dressed as ghosts. Of course they won't. They'll think we're real ghosts, of course. He said before skipping off and out of the room, making sure to place the scissors back on the desk on his way out. If anyone saw him, the last thing he wanted was for them to assume he was some kind of intruder trying to kill them with a pair of scissors. Sakuatsu jogged behind, calling out to him as their distances enlarged. Hey. Where are you going? Just give me a second, 𝗚𝗵𝘇. Jeez. 𝗴𝘚𝘂 called back, not slowing his pace for one moment. Sakuatsu instead scoffed and stopped running, deciding to go back to the room and wait for 𝗴𝘚𝘂 to come back, which he did rather quickly. Two sheets piled messily on top of each other in his hands, meaning he could barely see over the top of them. Can't last without me for a moment. Huh? What? Of course I can. Just if I get caught in here and accused of snooping around, who will I have to blame it on? 𝗴𝘚𝘂 scoffed, dropping the sheets onto the floor while letting out a deep breath followed by a smile. Whatever you say, 𝗚𝗵𝘇, but I know the truth. Yeah right. So what's the plan now? HAA. I mean, what are we doing with the sheets, idiot? Oh right. Omi, put one on your head, and I'll cut out the eye holes for you. Sakuatsu looked at him as if he was joking for a moment, but the setter's expression remained the same as he picked up one of the sheets he had just dropped on the floor and offered it out to Sakuatsu, who continued to look at him blankly. What? You okay? You mean, you're going to cut out the eye holes, while the sheet is on my head? I mean, yeah, it's much easier that doing it to yourself. I know from experience. Like hell am I going to let you put scissors near my eyes? You'll poke them out. Oh come on. I'm not that clumsy. We've done this before, you know. Plus I'm a setter. I would say that my hands are pretty steady. Your pretty steady isn't enough to convince me that you're not going to poke my eyes out. Omi, would I ever try to destroy your beautiful eyes? Yes. What? No, I would never. Sakuatsu scoffed and looked away from the boy, secretly trying to hide the redness of his cheeks that had surfaced since the blonde had called his eyes pretty. Eventually Atsumu sighed and reclined his offered out hand, bringing the sheet to his chest. Fine then, I guess you can do it for me first. It ain't that hard, you know. Plus I trust you enough. Why can't you trust me? This whole costume making screams disaster. That's why I can't trust you. It's a good idea, Omi. We can be matching. We'll look like complete idiots. Who cares? Maybe looking like an idiot could be your style. What? Shut up and cut me some eye holes out, he said, shuffling the sheet in his hand until he found what he thought to be the center of it. He then placed the sheet up and over his head, then letting the edges of it fall around his ankles. Almost his whole body was completely covered except his feet that were slightly peeking out. Sakuatsu tried his best to contain his laughter, though a few chuckles slipped out of his mouth, and despite being covered by a large sheet, Atsumu drew his hands to his face, shielding the blush forming on it despite knowing that Sakuatsu couldn't even see him. You look dumb. I'm invisible, Omi. How can I look dumb? You just do. You look dumb. Atsumu huffed and grabbed at the edges of the sheet, ruffling parts of it up in his hand so that he could direct a middle finger Sakuatsu's way before dropping the material to the floor again. Sakuatsu simply rolled his eyes and scoffed. Just shut up and cut out the eye holes already. Sakuatsu this time let out an audible laugh, walking towards Bakuto's desk where Atsumu had placed the scissors and picking them up, then walking to stand in front of the blonde, his hand lifting up to rest itself on top of Atsumu's head. What's taken so long? Cut them out already. Geez, just give me a moment or I'll poke your eyes out. Sakuatsu raised the hand holding the scissors, reaching them out towards the face of the floating sheet in front of him, pressing his fingers along the front of the fabric of it until he found where Atsumu's eyes were. The blonde letting out an expected gasp followed by a cuss as Sakuatsu practically pushed his fingers into his eye sockets. Do ya mind? That hurt. Just stop moving or you'll end up blind. Atsumu sighed, some of the air escaping through the material and directly into Sakuatsu's face, though he decided not to say anything despite being completely disgusted. He pinched the fabric dangling slightly further out to Atsumu's eyes, making one small but quick cut into the sheet. He then used the gap to form a half-wonky circle around Atsumu's eye, the blonde instantly looking into Sakuatsu's eyes as soon as he could see. Blood rose to their cheeks, though luckily disguised by the fabric covering Atsumu's entire face and the mask hooked around Sakuatsu's ears. They were so close together, Atsumu could even smell the scent of his cologne through the sheet as he reached over to begin cutting his second eye hole out. Atsumu's heart began to race, his instinct telling him to run away and go hide in a corner, but some part of him wanted to keep the closeness between them. Another part of him was telling him to wrap his arms around the spiker, though he thought it back, instead standing there like an idiot while Sakuatsu struggled getting a perfect eye hole. Something about Sakuatsu's focused features made his heart flutter, Sakuatsu's focuseness expressioned by his curving eyebrows and slightly squinting eyes. Atsumu wished he could also see the bottom half of his face, his one eye staring intensely at Sakuatsu's mask while his other eye remained in the dark of the spiker's perfection. Eventually Sakuatsu managed to cut the second hole after a lot of grunts and frowns, but he seemed to be pleased with his work after sorting out what he had done to the first eye. Placing the scissors down on the bed next to them when he was done and looking into the blonde's eyes. It wasn't like he had anywhere else to look, and the only thing that currently stood out about the setter was his golden eyes that popped with color amidst the plain background. What do ya think? Do I look good? You look better than before. Atsumu scoffed, turning his head to walk to Bakuto's desk where he noticed a mirror earlier. I'll take that as a compliment on how Amazon my costume looks. I wouldn't. Atsumu smiled to himself as he admired himself in the mirror. It was just like how he wanted it. Done with low effort. It's perfect, Omi. I know. I'm just so talented. I guess so. Atsumu hummed to himself, admiring himself a little longer in the small mirror hung just above Sakusa's desk before eventually turning around to face Sakusa, his hands resting on his hips as shown by the enlargement of the sheet around him. Omi-kun. Oh boy. What? I'm thirsty. Can you go and get me a drink? What? No. Go get your own damn drink. You have legs. But I don't wanna take this amazing costume off. You literally slip it over and off your head. It's not exactly rocket science. But Omi, I think I'm addicted to it. I cannot take it off. Therefore you must get my drink for me. Absolutely not. If you want a drink so bad, but you also don't want to take the sheet off of your dense head, then just go downstairs with it on. What? Hell no. I'd embarrass myself. Is that my problem? No one's forcing you to keep it on. Atsumu sighed, reluctantly grabbing one side of the sheet and slowly pulling it over the top of his head, revealing his now flattened blonde locks laying on the top of his head like it was dead. Sakusa couldn't help but let out a chuckle after seeing it. He then walked to the bed and dumped the sheet on top of it, making sure to give Sakusa some sort of glare as he walked to the door. I'll be back. Just give me a moment. Wait. What? Suddenly having a change of heart. What? No. Nothing like that. He said, walking to the door that Atsumu was already half out of, his head turning back to look at Sakusa as the spiker reduced the distance between them, raising an unexpected hand to the top of Atsumu's head and ruffling his hair with his hand. Atsumu's cheeks instantly turned beet red, and this time, there wasn't anything to hide it. Eventually Sakusa stopped ruffling the boy's hair, looking down at him to examine his expression, his cheeks immediately mirroring that of Atsumu's after seeing his flustered features. Though trying to keep his composure and despite his running mind questioning the reason as to why the blonde was looking that way, he did the best he could at shaking it off, taking in a strong gulp before speaking up. And luckily, it seemed his voice was on his side. Your hair was flat. You'd end up making yourself look like an even bigger idiot if you went out looking like that. Oh, shut up. I won't be long. Atsumu didn't spare Sakusa another glance. Walking further out of the room and along the corridor, Sakusa frowned at first, but blood soon shot to his cheeks at the idea of Atsumu not looking at him was to hide his reddened cheeks. His mind then began to fill itself up with all kinds of thoughts, smiling like an idiot as the picture of Atsumu blushing was still fresh in his mind. He shook his head and slapped the side of his face, trying to see if the situation was real, and the look on his face after he felt the stinging on his cheek from his hand was priceless. Holy shit. Dash. End of part 1. Yes, sorry besties. If you saw my community post you would see that I had to make this into 2 parts because of how much I wrote loudly crying face. Though not to fret. The next part should be up now or should be up in a couple minutes, so you shouldn't have to wait. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the first part of this one shot and I'll see you in the next part. Bye besties, 2 circling hearts.